Two men walked in Kagoshima Bay at midnight. One never came back. The survivor was dragged ashore, stripped of his name, and sent to a remote island, the edge of Japan. He was meant to be Uba. And why could Japan not let die? Two men walked into the sea together. Only one came back up. The survivor was Saigo Takamori, and Japan would spend the next century trying to understand what it had created. Saigo Takamori was born in 1828 in Kagoshima, the southernmost tip of Japan's main islands, a domain called Satsuma. He came from a family of low-ranking samurai, the kind who polished armor but rarely wore it. As a boy, he was already enormous, tall, broad, with the presence of a man twice his age. His education was ordinary, but his loyalty was extraordinary. By his 20s, that loyalty had caught the eye of the most powerful man in Satsuma, Lord Shimazu Nariakira. Shimazu Nariakira was unlike any daimyo Japan had seen. He studied Western science, built Japan's first Western-style warship, established a factory for modern weapons, and believed that Japan had to transform or be swallowed by foreign powers. He saw in Saigo not a servant, but an instrument, loyal, fearless, politically instinctive. For nearly a decade, Nariakira sent Saigo on delicate missions to Edo, cultivating allies, gathering intelligence. Saigo had found his purpose. And then, Nariakira died. In the summer of 1858, Japan's political world fractured. Naosuke, the newly appointed regent, ruling in the name of the shogun, signed a trade treaty with America without imperial approval, a move his opponents called treason. When those opponents protested, struck back with arrests, banishments, and executions. This crackdown became known as the Ansei Purge. Everyone who had pushed for reform, everyone connected to the anti-shogunate movement, became a target. Saigo's network was exactly that. Then came the blow that shattered everything. In July 1858, Lord Nariakira died suddenly at 50 years old. The official cause was illness. Rumors of poison circulated for decades. Whether treachery or fate, the result was the same. Saigo's protector was gone. The new Satsuma leadership had no use for him. The Ansei Purge was hunting his allies. With his patron dead and his enemies closing in, Saigo Takamori, 30 years old, without rank, without protection, was alone. It was in this darkness that he found Gesshō, a Buddhist monk from Kyoto. Gesshō was an unlikely revolutionary, quiet, learned, devoted to his temple, yet equally committed to the idea that Japan needed an emperor restored to power. He had defied the shogunate in letters and sermons, and now, like Saigo, was a hunted man. They met in the chaos of the purge. They recognized something in each other. Two men who had given everything to a cause that seemed to be dying. They formed a plan. Their plan was a form of protest that only made sense in a world where death had moral weight. If they could not live as reformers, they would die together, a statement that their cause was worth their lives. Saigo arranged for a boat to take them south from Kyoto to Kagoshima. They would seek refuge with Satsuma, and if Satsuma turned them away, they would walk into the sea. On November 15, 1858, Satsuma turned them away. The next night, they went to the bay.
Kagoshima Bay, November 16th, 1858. Cold, dark, the water still. Saigo and Gesshō waded in together. Behind them, the faint lights of the city. Before them, nothing but black water and the shape of Sakurajima in the darkness. Whatever they said to each other in those final moments was never recorded. They went under together. The sea does not care who you are. It received them both equally. But it did not keep them both. Gesshō drowned. His body was recovered days later. Saigo was pulled from the water, barely breathing, dragged to shore by soldiers or fishermen. Accounts differ. He had not wanted to survive. But his enormous body, even half drowned, refused to give up. He woke to find himself a prisoner. Gesshō was gone. His cause was scattered. His lord was dead. He was alive. He would later describe this period as the most shameful of his life. The man who could not even die properly. The Satsuma authorities faced a delicate problem. Executing Saigo outright risked creating a martyr. Releasing him would anger the shogunate. Their solution was exile, the bureaucratic death that leaves the body alive. He was stripped of his name and rank, given the alias Kikimori Saigo, and placed on a boat bound south. His destination? Amami Oshima, a subtropical island 700 kilometers from Kagoshima, home to sugarcane farmers and fishermen who had never heard of him. He arrived in early 1859. Amami Oshima was another world. Dense jungle, volcanic soil, a dialect Saigo could barely understand. The people were warm, but wary of this mainland giant who arrived in disgrace. He was assigned a small dwelling and left largely to himself. In those first months, he wrote poetry, melancholy, stripped-down verses about impermanence and loss. He read Buddhist texts. He replayed Gesshō's death in his mind. He had survived for no reason he could name. He needed to find one. Slowly, almost despite himself, Saigo began to engage with the island. He helped villagers with tasks. He listened to their grievances, many of them exploited by the Satsuma sugar monopoly. People whose suffering existed far from the political theaters he had once navigated. He taught the children. He learned the local dialect. The island people did not see a disgraced official. They saw a large, gentle man who seemed to carry a great sorrow and was slowly setting it down. Then he met Aigana, a local woman, graceful and calm, with the quiet self-possession of someone who had grown up at the edge of Japan and learned to need nothing from the mainland. She was not intimidated by his size abhor his history. They married by island custom, a bond the mainland would later refuse to recognize, but which was entirely real to both of them. They had 3 children together. For a man who had tried to die, Saigo had found, unexpectedly, a reason to live. But Satsuma had not finished with him. In 1862, just as Saigo seemed to be settling into island life, the domain recalled him briefly, then exiled him again to the harsher island of Okinoerabu, even further into the Pacific. The conditions there were severe. He was confined to a small fenced enclosure. The tropical heat was relentless. He was permitted few visitors and little movement. If the first exile had been a slow breaking down, this was designed to finish the job. On Okinoerabu, stripped of everything, family, freedom, purpose, comfort, Saigo arrived at the bottom of himself. And there, in that emptiness, something changed. He wrote to a friend, "Adversity is the furnace in which a man's true character is forged." He stopped grieving what had been taken and began examining what remained. What remained, he discovered, was immovable. A man who has lost everything and survived it fears nothing. He was becoming something the old Saigo had never been. Free. In 1864, Japan's political situation was in crisis. The Choshu domain had clashed with imperial forces. Foreign ships were threatening Satsuma's coastline. The new Satsuma leadership, which had exiled Saigo 6 years earlier, now desperately needed him. A messenger arrived on Okinoerabu with the recall order. Saigo packed the few possessions he had, said goodbye to the island, and returned to the mainland. He was 36 years old. He had been gone for 5 years. He walked off the boat in Kagoshima, and no one who saw him would forget it. What exile had given Saigo Takamori was impossible to manufacture. The certainty that comes only from having nothing left to lose. In the years ahead, he would help lead the armies that toppled the shogunate and restored the emperor to power. He would become the most celebrated military commander of the Meiji era. He would serve, briefly, as the most powerful man in Japan's new government. And he would walk away from all of it, because what he had learned on those islands was that power meant nothing without principle. The man who had waded into Kagoshima Bay to die in 1858 would die again in 1877. Not by drowning, but on a hillside in Kagoshima, leading a final rebellion against the Meiji government he had helped create. He would die because he could not accept a Japan that had abandoned the values he had nearly died for. Japan would mourn him immediately. The emperor himself would pardon him posthumously. They would build statues of him across the country. A man exiled and almost erased, made eternal.
Next time on Samurai Chronicles. They were called the 10 greatest warriors of the Sanada clan. Part ninja, part myth, all legend. But were they real? The Sanada 10 Braves, history's most famous mystery squad.
If the story of Saigo Takamori's exile moved you, subscribe for new episodes every day. Japan's greatest stories of survival, of transformation, of men who refused to be erased are just beginning.